Good morning. Everyone hear me? Louder? How's that? That's better. So I don't wear lapel mics because they always don't pick up very well. How's everyone doing this morning? Just bring up the computer. All right, perfect. Today I'm going to be sharing my testimony. Hopefully I can talk properly. Yeah, it's definitely, when thinking about sharing a testimony, it's definitely thinking back to how God has really changed and made it possible to even be standing here today, because technically it shouldn't even be possible. Should be lost in the world somewhere, doing whatever, something meaningless, pointless, with no purpose that doesn't really lead anywhere. So as I was preparing my testimony, I was trying to really make sure that Jesus gets the glory in the whole journey. So hopefully I won't keep you too long. But the theme of the testimony, I really liked Colossians 1:27, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory. And to them God willed to make known what are the riches of the glory of this mystery among the Gentiles, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory. And there's a couple verses I was just thinking about as before I even came into the world. Psalms 139 and 13, for you formed my inward parts, and you covered me in my mother's womb. Jeremiah 1 verse 5, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And so to go back to the very beginning, I was born to Ukrainian Adventist parents. Both were Adventists, grew up in the church. And some memories from early on were my dad and mom liked to take us camping every weekend, almost every weekend, into the mountains, like canoeing, camping, backpacking, things like that. He just had a love for nature and just getting out in creation. My dad was a school teacher, actually. He taught math and science, but grades 7 to 9. But he had a real passion for kids, so he wouldn't just be, teaching in class. He would take them out on adventures, like rocks and trees and plants and anything that he could show them and teach them about. And I grew up on a farm. I don't know if anyone knows Murnum. Near Two Hills, east of Edmonton in Alberta. So a little bit farther out that way. A little farm kind of tucked away, and usually when I grow up with my Guido and my Baba, with Guido kind of driving the tractor, kind of sitting on him and trying to steer the best you can when you're like 3 or 4 years old. And Baba was making like amazing pierogies and halupchi and lenestiki and traditional Ukrainian dishes. But one thing I remember too is when I was about 4, I think, I was supposed to be in bed and like I'd snuck out and the door closed behind me and I was too short to actually reach up and open it again. So my dad came back and he tried to pretend that it was a big deal, but he just kind of laughed at me and just the kind of person that he was. But yeah, there was, through all the different memories, I remember my father brought home kind of those bicycles with a banana seat and 8 handlebars. Those taught me to ride it kind of in the wind. It actually helped with the balance a little bit, but and like playing with goats, like jump in their pen and they'd run after you, and you'd like run up the fence really fast and they'd like slam into the fence. And you're just trying to play with them a little bit. But I don't have a lot of memories. It's a little bit foggy because when my father was 38, he ended up passing away from colon cancer. They didn't think that he would pass away. The doctors thought he'd be fine, but kind of the last treatments, it just attacked the body and he just didn't make it. And so, yeah, just I guess during all that time, you have some of the memories are, I think, blocked. But my dad was raised on that farm near Murnum and just really loved being out in God's creation in the country. My mom, on the other hand, was raised in the city. So when my dad passed away, she was all by herself and she didn't really know what she was going to do. So she ended up moving us to Leduc, which wasn't too much farther away. But yeah, just even to start with that, as we moved to Leduc, as I think back over the years, I know I wouldn't be here unless my mother had been praying for me and my sister. Like over the years, she was always very constant, always trying to draw us back to God, even though it didn't appear like anything was happening for many, many years. She just kept praying and kept encouraging and doing what she could, being a single mom for a while. And then it's actually interesting because Seth had a sermon a little while back now, but he had shared some stats about being raised without a father. And usually the statistics are not very good for ending up either like in prison or having multiple addictions or in gangs or death or like anger, violence, things like that. So to look back and see kind of where I could have ended up, it's definitely a testament to God's leading and protection and guidance along the way. So yeah, when we had moved to the Leduc, I was in kindergarten and grade 1. And usually was, I guess you could call a good kid, tried to be good at least, to follow as best. Wasn't trying to get into too much mischief and stuff like that. But I know that moving into Leduc, moving into the city, it definitely brought its own vices and temptations. And so before I knew it, like kindergarten, grade 1, I ended up one time running across the street to school, and we'd found some spray paint cans. I was like, hey, what can you do with those? So we just started spray painting things on the wall. And then down near the hallway, the door opened, and someone was like, hey, what are you doing? And so we quickly ran across the street to our house, and they just kind of watched us and called the police, and the police showed up at the door, and my mom was like, what is going on here? What happened? So then, long story short, I ended up having to do like community service in kindergarten. But my mom made sure that she didn't want me to do that again. So I had to pick up garbage in the schoolyard for, I think, 1 or 2 months. And she'd always supervise me, or I went into a store one time and I found some gum and I put it in my pocket and just started slowly walking out. And then the store owner saw me and he just didn't let on that he had seen me. He's like, hey, oh, got some stickers from the kids. He said, if you don't ever come back here, I won't call the police. And so it scared me so badly that I never did it again. Or there was, getting like skateboard parks and different things that you could be seen by young minds there. Or, being punched in the stomach on the bus, going to school, and things like that. There was a lot going on, even at such a young age. You could see the devil really just trying to quickly lead you in a certain direction. Then shortly after, my mom got me remarried. But then, which may or may not be a good thing, depending on how things go. But in this case, my stepdad was definitely friendly and involved before they got married, but afterwards, it didn't really go that way. So it ended up being that he was more recluse and didn't spend time with us and things like that, other than if we were in the garage, fixing cars or things like that. But I guess, yeah, a short little side note that I hadn't thought of sharing, but many years later, a friend of mine, when my parents were no longer together, and a friend encouraged me to go and visit him and to forgive him. And I was like, no, that's a terrible idea. Why would I? But she kept, like, it's, if he passes away and you haven't made your peace with him, then yeah, you're just going to have feelings of regret. And so I kept praying about it, and I said, okay, I'll go. So I went to Kelowna. He was in Kelowna at the time, and spent a week with him. And at that point, even though we're jumping ahead a little bit, I had known the Lord. I did know the Lord. And so I had been reading like Desire of Ages to him a little bit. And near the end of the week, I could actually see like a little bit of emotion, something like the Lord was working on him. And he was prone to seizures, so he couldn't drive as well without medication. So we had gone out on a houseboat, or a houseboat, kind of like a boat meal type event, I guess, and he had had a seizure. And then we're sitting across the table from one another, and you can see the eyes just kind of roll back, and you have to just like run across and grab so he doesn't like fall over and like hurt himself. So like different things like that were happening, but at the end of the week, we just like we were at peace. We were able to like forgive and move on. And then a number of years later, he had ended up passing away. So it's that one chance that I did have. So if I encourage anyone, if there's someone in your life that you haven't made peace with, it definitely brings your mind at peace, and yeah, it definitely helped quite a bit for my healing. But going back to Leduc, from Leduc, my mom got remarried, and then we ended up moving almost every school grade. Just like bam, 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 just all over the place. Between Alberta and BC, like Didsbury, Murnum, Leduc, Silver Creek, Langley, Medicine Hat, Cranbrook, Ponoka, kind of just like all over the place. So it definitely took a little bit of a toll as you just start to meet someone, like make friends, and then next year you're gone. And then next year you start to make friends again, and then you're gone again. But thankfully, my stepdad liked living in the country. So wherever we went, usually it was on an acreage or things like that. So it definitely helped. And I don't really remember a whole lot, to be honest, from grades like 3 to 8 as much, like some memories. Other than I know in Cranbrook, I was working for like the Boys and Girls Club, doing like lawn service at like age 12. They had like carts behind your bike, and you'd hook up your like lawnmower, weed eater, rakes and all that, and you pull it. They tell you where to go and do the lawn maintenance and go back. So that's kind of the early years, like a quick review, I guess I could say, of grades from like 0 to grade 8. And there's a picture. You can see my father. I don't know if you can guess which one he is, but he is in the far right top. He was a little bit shorter. He was only about 5'9", but I ended up being 6 feet more because of my uncle, I believe. So, and then you see my Guido and my Baba and my auntie. So then when we come to grade 9, my mom was like, no, we're not moving anymore. We moved to Lacombe, and this is where we're staying for a while. We're going to stay through school. And then in grade 9, ended up getting in a car accident. I wasn't driving, but a good friend of mine we'd known since I was young. We were heading out to go canoeing, and the canoe's on the top of the car. Him and I, Matthew, are in the back seat. And at that point, you don't really wear seatbelts that often. So we didn't have seatbelts. My parents had seatbelts. And so we're driving along gravel road, and he saw a truck kind of coming, and the truck was actually waving. He was waving to a friend in the field and missed the stop sign. And so my friend's father sped up to try to miss him, but he sped up to like 100, 110. And then I looked over, and then the truck just like hit us in the rear axle of the car. And I can still hear, as the car was like spinning or like sliding, it was sliding, and then it just caught and like flipped into the ditch and just ended up landing on its roof. and just like lying in glass everywhere. But again, no seatbelt. And I just had like minor lacerations on my chin and just a little bit on my back, but nothing, that was it. Whereas my friend Matthew, he went out the window either beside me, because that was the window that was broken, or the back window, like head first. And the gentleman that ended up stopping, like that hit us, performed CPR on him and saved his life. And the pressure in his brain had built up, so like say 30 is brain damage. It had gone up to like a 29, but then it started coming down. But then through that situation, God changed him. And he was living kind of a precarious life, and he ended up becoming a youth pastor. So like God, and I remember getting home just being like really sore, and just like you just biked 100 kilometers or something, like Randy knows. And yeah, I just like wondered, like at that point I had a belief in God growing up in the church, but a respect for God, but never really knew that you could have a personal relationship with God. Didn't know what that looked like. Like you hear nice things in church, nice stories, but it never really, so I just like didn't understand what was happening, but God had spared my life. Because he knew that the adversary always tries to take our lives before our time. And then later on in grade 9, I was skiing at Big White. We had gone on a school trip. And it's the last run of the day, like usual. Went over a jump, and just it threw me forward. Like usually you go over, you kind of go up in the air, but it just like threw me forward. Just the way the jump was. And I came down, and the elbow just like, so kind of like how the elbow's held in, one of these bones broke off, and just like shot. And then they had to take me back on a stretcher, which, as many may know, isn't super comfortable on the bumpy snow, but again, got through all these things like skiing, and I'll get into a little more later, but I was trying to find some sort of purpose, some sort of meaning in these things. They may not necessarily be bad in themselves, but it just always trying to push faster, harder, whatever it may be, and then you'd be energetic, and it'd be awesome for just a short period of time, and then you just kind of feel like, oh, okay, what's the next thing? So in high school, kind of get into biking a little bit more, trying to like push things with riding on whatever you could or jumping off stuff. Because high school, like very shy, teacher asks me a question in the class. You're like, yeah, I'd rather not answer. And I had a very bad temper, especially in sports. Like just lash out at people, and disengaged, heavily involved in like video games, that kind of stuff. But then thankfully, the Lord actually got me involved in mountain biking, because it was actually one way that he kept me out of a lot of trouble. Looking back, I could have went many different ways, but it's the one thing that I actually enjoyed. It was always outside, out in the mountains, fresh air. But it did come with its aches and pains. Like this shoulder was dislocated about 25 times. And the doctors finally showed me how to put it back in. So if I'm out in the middle of nowhere, then you can just lay down on your back and have your arm at your side, and then you just like pull it towards you, and it just kind of goes thunk, and then you just have to go back somehow. So if you ever have a dislocated shoulder, but again, always just searching for meaning. But thankfully, the Lord led me to a good physician that was able to, they did orthoscopic surgery and went in and like reconstructed the whole shoulder, and it's been fine ever since. And then one thing my stepdad is encourage me to like do like full frame restorations on vehicles. He would help me. He's always in the garage tinkering with stuff. And again, looking back between like mountain biking and mechanics, it was like two things that the Lord used to keep me out of a lot of trouble. And looking back, give a lot of talent that can be used to help other people. So then after high school, going towards college, you are obviously thinking about your career and what you want to do in life. And these verses stood out as I undertook that journey, not even realizing where the Lord was going to take me. In Psalms 106:8, nevertheless he saved them for his name's sake, that he might make his mighty power known. In John 3:17, which we read this morning, for God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. And Isaiah 45:22, look to me and be saved, and you ends of the earth, for I am God and there is no other. In Acts 4:12, nor is there salvation in any other, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which you must be saved. So yeah, God was he was up to something, and I did not know it. Like I said, I'm raised in the church, didn't know God, always respectful, but still dabbling in things that were just potentially could lead in a direction very quickly that he didn't want. So after college, I worked in like a printing press, doing like finished bindery, like on one of the big cutters. It's like I have a job that would come in, you can cut it to size, and it would get sent off. And then during that time, I was trying to decide whether I was going to get into mechanics or computers. And I ended up going the computer route. And God had a plan on that as well, because I originally applied to computer science. But then when I applied, they said, no, your math grades aren't high enough. You have to pick something else. You can pick anything else. So then I ended up picking network engineering, which was a blessing based on the people that were in that class that I still know to this day. And then during the time at SAIT, ended up during the summers working at Chinook Aviation just outside of Calgary at Springbank Airport, painting like belly panels for helicopters and custom parts and making like tail boom jigs and that kind of stuff, just for something fun to do. But because my roommate was working there, so he had got me in there. But again, still trying to figure out where I was going, what God wanted me to do. And yeah, I continued to have more accidents in the mountains, being like stuck way out. Katrina was on one of the adventures in Quarry Pass in Lake Louise. And I'm hiking up and then jumping down scree. I know some people may have done that. Scree jumping, really loose rock. And ended up jumping and then coming down. And my sister was like, hey, do it again. I was like, sure. So I go up the second time and come back down, and I was slightly on a different path, and there was bigger rocks that I didn't see, and just like twisted the ankle, like flipped me right over and landed right on my backpack. And then I just like a shot of pain where I couldn't even lift up my leg. And we were at the top, and it's a very steep hike. And so, like, how are you supposed to get down? And the nighttime is coming. You don't have much daylight. And so we just prayed about it, even though, again, you're just starting to figure out the Lord. You know, people say pray. Let's pray. So we prayed and kind of like slid down the mountain with the leg lifted on like the hands and slid down to where my sister was. And then we kind of started walking on the path. And I was holding on to my other friend, just kind of hopping along. And I was like, I don't know, I kind of feel it's not too bad. So then we ended up walking all the way down the mountain. But again, it was, if the Lord didn't help, we'd have been stuck out there and who knows what. And then during this time as well, ended up getting to like skydiving, things like that, like tandem jumps, solo jumps. Again, trying to just push the envelope more and more. Because I found like anything outside, the temper like was temporarily gone. Like anger, it would subside. because I didn't know how to control it. I didn't know what was causing it. It would come up, and I just couldn't get rid of it. Didn't know what to do. So trying all these different things, getting this temporary rush, but the Lord was still up to something. So here's a few adventures in some of the mountains. Katrina and I horseback riding near Lake Louise, and Kyle, a buddy from Calgary, definitely an outdoorsy guy, always up in the mountains somewhere. Yeah, the top picture was where I twisted my ankle. That was the friend that I had held on to the back of for a while. We look quite a bit younger there. Some backpacking trips. Katrina was actually how many months pregnant there? Doing some backpacking. Some biking with Sean, Marlon, and Sean Cliff, and a friend of ours from Airdrie. Some funny, cool pictures we had hiking in Healy Pass near Banff. And so yeah, again, all these things are happening, and then you're started the computer career. And so again, still didn't know the Lord, trying to still be respectful. Even the Sabbath, I always, throughout my whole career, would always keep the Sabbath for whatever reason. It was always something, it's no, it won't work on Sabbath. But through the whole computer career, the Lord always blessed, never had to work on Sabbath. Even in companies that said, that's impossible. But then it always worked out. So as I was starting to get into my computer career, I was thinking of these verses came up. Now these are the ones sown among thorns. They're the ones who hear the word, and the cares of this world, and the deceitfulness of riches, and the desire for other things entering in choke the word, and it becomes unfruitful. Or Matthew 6:24, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. So you can see maybe where this is going. It was more of a pursuit of money, career, that kind of stuff. Oops. So I ended up, after Calgary, going into Lacombe to work for, I don't know if anyone knows Eric Raja. You know him? Yeah. He owns Advanced Systems. He's an Indian man, but very, I don't know, always been like a father figure to me in my computer career, at least. Someone you can always talk to, call up. He just always wants the phone, talk to you no matter what's happening. But then I just wasn't satisfied there, so I ended up going to Calgary because I wanted more experience, more money, to get out there a little bit. But again, what do you think I found out there? Is not satisfied. It's never quite enough. So at this point, I was 26, 27, somewhere in there. Still heavily involved in playing video games and watched a lot of TV. Had spindles full of pirated movies and music, and video games, TV shows, everything. It was spindles full of them. But then one night I came home low and I was playing a first-person shooter game. I was going through the game and it had certain evil symbols and sounds, things jumping out at you, and just the hairs on the back of my neck kind of stood up. And I was like, something's not right about this. It's for the first time. This is basically when the Lord started to bring the change. So I went to Staples, actually, and bought a pair of really good scissors and came home, and all the spindles full of everything. I just, very satisfactory, cut them all in half and destroyed all of it. But no one told me to do that. No one was hounding me to, stop doing anything. It was just the Holy Spirit working on me to get rid of this stuff. Took a little bit. I went away from more violent games to like just to like Need for Speed or like racing type games, and then finally just stopped. Thankfully. And then during this time, someone had sent me a video. I don't know if anyone ever, it's a while back, but everyone heard of the video Mission Pilot by David Gates? Yeah, I'd watched it, and I was like watching the video, and it's like this video of people helping each other or helping people in different countries. And I was like, in my mind, I was like, I'd really like to do something like that, like help people, but I'm shy, I don't like being out front, don't like doing anything in the public sphere, and don't really like doing things at church or like whatever it may be. And I was like, well, if I could do something like that, then great. And then I just kind of left it. Nothing really happened. But it was always just like stuck in my mind a little bit. And then the Lord wasn't done yet. So I ended up watching a health series on becoming vegetarian and vegan. And at that point, I still ate meat, different things like that. Always clean meats, always believed in that still, or followed that. But I watched the series, he was kind of cheeky, but I don't know, there's just something about it. I was like, let's just try it. Let's try it and see how you feel. At that point, I was working quite hard, get home late, just be like tired, not have any energy. And within like 3 months, I just had like tons of energy. And out biking and hiking and rollerblading and whatever I could do. And then 6 months and a year, and just like the energy just kept increasing. Like, this is perfect. Why would I go back? So usually I tell people, if you don't think that it will work, then just try it and see how you feel. But then my mother had actually given me counsels on diet and foods, or diets and food, and Bibles, which I never read. I think I had 3 of them on the shelf. So then as I'm watching the health videos, I'm thinking, God puts in my mind to read counsels on diet and foods. It's sitting right there. So as I'm reading it, there's Bible verses in there. And then in the Bible verses lead me then to the Bible. And for the first time in 27 years, it finally makes sense. It's like it's logical. It makes sense. Like you could believe this and follow it, like in your daily life. So I continued reading in the strong conviction, which was very hard actually for me. There was a strong conviction to quit my job. And I'm like the type of person that you always pay your bills and work hard and invest and save and like all this stuff. So it's like when a conviction comes to quit, I was like, yeah, that's ridiculous. Why would you do that? So I kept pushing it off, and the more I was reading, the conviction kept coming to the point where I just couldn't shake it anymore. So then the conviction was coming that you need to pick a date. You can't just keep putting it off. And so I picked January 31st. That was the date that I had picked. And then as soon as I picked the day, I had experienced, which I'd never experienced before, it was like complete peace. So I had no idea what was going to happen. I didn't have a job to go to. And I was just like at peace. I was like, that's weird. Okay. But then as the date kept coming closer, I had to go and talk to my boss. So I go and talk to him and tell him that I was potentially wanting to be a mission pilot and go to start flight training. And then he's a really friendly guy, nice guy, but he looked at me and says, "You're not a pilot." But he respected my decision, and we left on good terms. But then as I was leaving Calgary, I needed how do you pay for flight training, which can be quite expensive. So then Land Solutions, who I was working with, they ended up getting a call from Winners and HomeSense. And they said, "Hey, we have a contract. Do you guys want to do it? It's 1 month have to go to a certain number of stores and replace network gear, servers, that kind of stuff. And I said, sure. He said, we're not going to do it, but if you want it, you can take it. And I said, perfect. So then he's like, whatever you want. Like, they'll pay what you want. So then ended up making, it was about $8,000 in less than a month, only working about 3 weeks, just traveling around. But again, the Lord provided the funds that were needed at that time. So then off I go to Red Deer and start flight training in Red Deer, and then continue working for Advanced Systems as you're paying and flying and things like that. And then as I moved back to Lacombe, I ended up meeting with the pastor and started studying for baptism. And the pastor, I still remember, it was Pastor Sydenham, Ron Sydenham in Lacombe. He's retired now. But I'd go through the studies, and he would say, do you have any questions at the end? And I'm like, no, all makes sense. Next one, you have any questions? No, it just makes sense. And that's how we went through all the studies. And then we ended up, my sister and I ended up getting baptized the same day. As you can see, Ron Sydenham is on the right, and my sister and I, and Pastor Felix from Calgary Central. And we got baptized in the river at Bowden Camp meeting. But then once baptism happened, then you're like, okay, well, now what do you do? You're raised in the church, but you're like, I don't know what you really do now, but still quite fresh. Kind of the mission aviation kind of in your mind, that plan. But then an opportunity came to go to GYC and an advanced conference. Advance was the first time, kind of like a GYC they had in Birmingham, England. So way off in the UK. It's about 2.5 hours from London, England. So went off there and met, it's amazing actually, the church family, like the Adventist family throughout the world. People you've never met, you just show up in the UK and they're like, hey, come live with us for a week, or and then from there, the opportunity came up to go to Davis Indian Industrial College in Parima, Guyana. So in South America, it was through Gospel Ministries International, through David Gates. And originally they had called and said, hey, do you want to just teach like small engine repair? I was like, yeah, I don't know. How do you do that in the jungle? But I thought, hey, if the Lord's opening the way, then I just prayed about it. That's basically what I was doing all through the journey. It's like anything that came up, I'd pray about it. And if the Lord opened the way, then I would go. And sure enough, the flight tickets, there was an older couple in Lacombe who I'd done computer work for. They heard that I was thinking of going. And they called me up and they said, hey, we'll pay for your flight. And then I was reading different things in the Bible, and the call of Abraham kept coming up to like leave your family and your friends and just go. So it's like, sure, we'll go. I'd have no idea what to expect. And then when you get there, as many may know in the mission field, like, hey, now that you're here, we don't have enough volunteers. What else would you like to help with? So then they said, oh, would you like to be an English teacher and the boys' dean? Because we only have 4 people this year. Normally they had, 10, 15 people that were there. I said, okay, we'll try it and see. But thankfully the Lord was really like leading gently, because he knew how much I could handle at the very beginning. And we had to do staff worships. And so you'd stand up like this with all the students. There's about 30 of us. And for the first while, I was just kind of up there hiding behind the book, reading. And then by the end of the school year, we were walking around and sharing. But it was only because of all the changes that the Lord had done up to that point, because I wouldn't have been doing it otherwise. So as the school year went on, we had many answers to prayer, and like tons of answers to prayer. You'd pray for something, and it would happen. You'd pray for something, and it would happen. I was like, what? Why is it different here, but then it's different back home? It doesn't seem to be that way. So at the end of the year, the four of us sat down, the staff, and was like, why is this? And the one thing we could come up with is we were completely out of our comfort zone. We had to rely on God for everything. The food we ate, because it only came in by plane when it wasn't rainy season, and everything, you had to feed like 30 people and take care of people that are getting hurt. And there was a garden that was up on like Rain Mountain. It's like all these things going on, teaching, and it's like, it's impossible. But God made it possible. And so a couple times with food, we're giving the cooks the last little bit of food. And we're like, what are we going to do tomorrow? We have no food. And so we were praying about it. And then the next day, the pilot called us. And he says, the rains have lifted. We're coming. And it happened twice. The second time was easier than the first time because we'd seen him already do that. And then one time, one of the students came and was like, sir, one of the other missionaries, someone that had come to see if they wanted to help a family, said, sir, the lady might have broken her ankle. They were out by the river, and I said, well, it's Saturday, it's Sabbath. The plane never flies on Sabbath unless it's a medical emergency. So I said, well, let's pray. So you get down and kneel and pray, and then we're like, what is that sound? And then you could hear the plane coming. We like recognize the sound because all the planes are a little bit different sounding. And sure enough, it shows up. And then he had been in another village and for a medical emergency. And then he was like, I should fly back to Georgetown, which is the capital. I was like, oh, no, maybe I'll go to Prima for the night. It's a little bit closer. And so he had come that direction instead. Already God had made provision. And then like halfway through the year, the students, we just could not control them. Just like everything we said, they would do the opposite. And we're just like at our wit's end. And we're like, okay, we're done. We're leaving. And then I was reading a book, and it had talked more about prayer. And so the four of us staff, I suggested, what if, because worship for the students was at 5:30 in the morning. So I said, let's meet at 5 and let's pray. So the first morning we came together and we prayed. And that day, it was different, like just within one day. We're like, nothing was perfect, but there was a decided change that you could see and feel. So God had answered that prayer too. And then one time they had all the missionaries teach Sabbath school. So again, another thing that you're supposed to do. And then during Sabbath school, it's like you need to trust in the Lord. He'll give you whatever you need to say. That was kind of the theme of the lesson. And then the lesson ended, and some of the elders from the church came and they said, the person that was supposed to speak today, he can't make it. You need to speak. I was like, I think I need a little more time than that because it's going to be starting in like 10 minutes. And then the Lord brought back to my mind what I had just been teaching. I'll give you whatever you need to say. So I was like, okay, well, you have to show me what to say because I have no idea. So then I opened my Bible, and at the back, I had like sermon notes from someone else's sermon, and I looked through them. I was like, oh, it makes sense. So let's just share that. So then got up front, and it was translated. So then shared the sermon, and one of the students actually came to me afterwards and said, that was a really good sermon, sir. I was like, it was? It definitely didn't feel like it. So again, just ways the Lord was working to build confidence in Him, not in ourselves. And then one more story I'll share is the students we were taking them on a week of prayer trip to another village. You had to walk about a week, maybe 4 days, I guess, through the jungle. And everyone was getting the supplies together. And one of the students came back from the village. I'm going to leave the next day. And looking back, we thought, I think, because he went to get a toothbrush for the trip. And we joke now that like an angel took the toothbrush out and just like, because otherwise we never would have went back into the village. It was late. So I was like, I can't find my toothbrush. I need it for the trip. So I was like, well, back we go. Take the dirt bike and get back in. And then around the health center, they had like just a little basic health center, all these people were mingling. And there was like kind of like a commotion. And I'm like, what is going on? It's like how late at night, Sabbath night. So I kind of push my way through to get to where the health workers are. And the village captain, he's kind of in charge of everything. His mother, who was quite old, had bitten by a poisonous snake. And usually they're going to die. There's nothing much you can do. And so they're like, well, we've done all we can. We don't know what else to do. So God put the thought in my head of what a mission pilot's wife had told me. If you're ever in that situation, use charcoal. Activated charcoal, make a poultice. I was like, oh. So I talked to the health workers and said, I have charcoal back at the campus. Do you mind if I try it? And they said, sure. So back I went, got the charcoal, made the poultice. And then what we would do is we would set the watch for 15 minutes, because that's what the mission pilot's wife had said to do. Set the watch for 15 minutes, and then we would pray for 15 minutes, and then the alarm would go off, and then we'd change the poultice, and we'd pray again for 15 minutes. And we did that for like 2 or 3 hours. I don't really remember. It was like 2 or 3 in the morning. And at the very beginning, she actually vomited once, which wasn't a good sign, because the poison was starting to... But as we kept going, you could tell, like the vitals, she was calming down, and she was even getting more restful. And then when she was at the point where she was like, we could tell she was sleeping, and then we said, okay, well, we've done all we can do. So we went back and had slept for the night, and then left on the trip to the other village. And we stopped in to see how she was doing. And she was like up and about and happy and thankful. And and just to give a little insight, as the captain was not very warm to us of the village, and we didn't see him at that time. So we went off for the week of prayer, and then ended up going to a church dedication on the way back, and saw him there. And he saw me, and he's like, comes and shakes my hand, and is like very friendly, and so you can see even like simple, like medical missionary work, just like simplest of things, how God used that to soften his heart, even though I never knew that that's where he was going with it. And then another story too is when we were at the week of prayer walking back, I made a very foolish decision. The plane was taking everyone to the other village for the church dedication. And I said, oh, yeah, I'll be fine. I'll just walk back. It's 4 or 5 hours, not too far. It's into the jungle. I know where I'm going. So then I started walking, and all of a sudden I'm like, there's trails that just keep going off on other trails, and I don't know where these are. I don't even know where I am. And nighttime is going to come. And then I remember walking around this corner, and there was this gentleman there. His name was Caleb Trim. He was like a manager of like gold mine, that kind of. There's lots of them around there. But I never forget, as I came around the corner and looked at him, it's like he knew that I was coming. It's like finally you're here. That's what it felt like. And I don't know these guys. It's like a camp, mining camp. And he's like, yeah, you can stay with us. We'll try to radio the guys in Kaikan to let them know you're okay, because there's no time to take you there before dark. So he brought me in and ended up being Christian. And had a very, I thought, and I was praying that morning, it's like, hey, will you help me to reach out to someone today? And it ended up being the opposite. As the next morning, they took care of me, food, everything. And the next morning, he took me by quad to the trail that would lead me down to the river. And then from there, he said, just take a boat up to where you need to go. But then when we got to the trailhead, he's like, why are you going to Kaikan? It was the village. And I said, well, it's a church dedication. You know, David Gates will be there. And he's like, oh, no, why are you going? And I was kind of confused by his question. It's like, are you going because there's a man there? Or because God is going to be present? So it always stuck in my mind, just the lesson. As we come to church, like God is actually here. Angels are here. And sometimes we can lift up people as gods even, like prominent speakers, people we respect, but they're still erring human beings like we are. But yeah, it took care of me. I walked down to the village, down to the river. And he's like, who's going to come? I have no idea. And then sure enough, up the river comes the military, the Venezuelan military. And they are not always the nicest people, tend to not be the nicest. And one of them was, when I had come to wait, he was sitting there, and they were going to pick him up. So then he said, yeah, you can come along if you want. We're going up to where you're going, and you can just come along, we'll drop you off. I thought, well, sure. What's the worst that could happen? So then, yeah, I got a military escort up to the village, and they were very nice, accommodating, like all decked out with heavy machine or fully automatic weapons, but very kind, generous people. So. And so that's a little bit of where Parima, the campus, and then you can see on the right, the mechanics class, we really had like a basket of tools that we had to use. That was about it. And on the bottom right, that's the stove for cooking. And on the left, that's essentially where you went through to get food. And some of the volunteers. And on the top right is the shower. So it was a nice, fresh outdoor shower. It's the plane with some of all the staff. And you had different wildlife, different things along the way. Little birds or insects. And on the top right, that's what they're making is cassava bread. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of cassava, but maybe a few. And then from there, came back to Canada, and it felt very strange to be back in Canada after spending all that time there. And then the opportunity came up almost right immediately when we got back to go to cross training. It's like an intensive for Rise. It's like a three-week intensive. I think it's a little bit different now, but ended up staying with a family who, after I left, they had said, hey, you want to get into flight training? If you come back to the U.S., we'll pay for all of it. You just have to come back. I thought, I don't know. But the Lord had been working on me a little bit differently, so to the point where when I was in Ghana flying with some of the pilots every so often, I just kept getting the impression God wanted me to be on the ground and just work with the people on the ground and not get so caught up in like be in the sky flying. They were very busy all the time, rushing, always here, there, everywhere, which is fine. That is what's needed. But I just kept getting the impression, no, stay on the ground. So then God had used the desire for flying to get me out of my job in Calgary, kind of lead me along, and then to the point where he's like, nope, that's not the direction. That was used just to get you out. So he may have a different plan. You just never know. So cross-training ended up meeting DJ, my future father-in-law. He was there. Or sorry, brother-in-law. And then as I was flying back, again, from the US to Canada, anyone's ever familiar of your flights getting bumped? If the flight is full, and they'll radio say, hey, anyone can stay for a little bit, and we'll pay for your hotel, and you can go first class on the next flight, that kind of thing. So I was like, well, I'm not in a hurry. I'll just wait. And again, God had more divine appointments that I hadn't realized were going to come. So I stayed in the hotel, and then the next day they put me in first class, and I'm walking up to the seat, and there's this huge man. He's just massive. His name was Gary Brenneman, and he kind of looked at me, and I looked at him, and he's like, maybe you should look for another seat. Like, I'm kind of big. I don't know. You're not going to fit. I said, oh, it's fine. Like, if you can come out in the aisle, I can just sneak in. I'm pretty skinny, so. So then, again, the Lord had a divine appointment, as he ended up being a mechanical engineer with Sonco. They're a big company all around the world. And in talking to him, he had been raised in the church, but never really followed it. And as I was sharing some things I had learned from cross-training with him, I had kind of looked over, and he started weeping. I was like, what? Like, I just never expected that. Like, this big man, very successful. But yeah, he just started weeping. He didn't say a whole lot. We talked more, but we exchanged cards and information. But yeah, you just never know who God's going to bring in your path. And then one of the other flights, because sometimes there's multiple flights, is I ended up sharing more with a woman I was sitting beside about things at cross-training, and really focusing on sharing about Jesus and his love for them. And in finding out, she actually ended up being the vice president of Delta Airlines. She said she usually would fly on some of the flights to just see how the staff were and if they were being friendly and helpful and how the feel of the flights was. So I had a good conversation with her, shared some DVDs, different material. Don't know what happened from that, but you leave it in the Lord's hands. And then from there, we ended up, maybe I'll have to do a part 2 on this, but you guys probably want to eat. From there, we ended up starting Natural Lifestyle Centers. It was a health food store in Blackfalls, Alberta. And it was a health food store with like a meeting room you can see kind of in the back, bottom left. There's a small cafe, like smoothies, nice vegan food, that kind of stuff. So people would come, and yeah, we had prayed about it, and we ended up opening and starting with 0 debt. Like there was enough donations at the right time, and like own funds that were donated, and it was open, ready to go, and there was no debt. I was like, how did that even happen? And then during this time, we were volunteering, and the visa payment, my visa was coming up to be paid. And I was like, how am I going to pay this? I'm just volunteering. So I'm like praying about it, and finally the last day that I had to pay it, I just had peace. And then I got a call from Advanced Systems, who I used to work for. Before I went to Guyana, they had forgot to pay me my vacation pay. So they said, hey, we forgot to pay your vacation pay. And my visa bill was about $1,300. And they said, yeah, vacation pay, it's like $1,300. And all sorts of volunteers came together to make it possible with construction and setting up shelves and painting and all sorts of stuff. But then we opened, and then there was something that happened. as we opened, the thought came into my mind, and I shared it with the other guys. Is now that we're opening, we're entering onto familiar territory. We're all used to working in a store or a business environment, whereas up to this point, it's all been you have to trust the Lord for everything. So it said there's a danger, and we have to be careful. And then sure enough, we started getting busy and started praying less together, and then to the point where we were just all like burnt out completely. And then I remember being in the meeting room, and someone said something that was, I don't even think necessarily directed at me. And I just said, no, that's it. I just can't handle it anymore. I'm done. If this is ministry, then I'm out. So I made a choice that I definitely have regretted, but thankfully the Lord healed through that whole process. It was a bit of a process, but yeah, I definitely turned away from God. Went back to old lifestyle, different things. And I was working through like depression and burnout. But I remember being at my mom's. I went to my mom's one night and was sleeping on a cot in the basement. And my mind was just like, it's just like bombarded, I feel like, with the adversary's angels, just like putting thoughts in my head. It's just like I couldn't think straight. It's just like almost like possession is what I thought. And then unconsciously, I was like, God was just like, put the thought in my head, just ask for help. You don't have to keep going this way. Like, I'm still here. So then I said, oh, well, please help me. And it was from the heart, and instantly he put a name into my mind about a gentleman that I had worked with in the Blackfalls Church. He was leaving back to the UK. Met him in Calgary, and it was the turning point. He's like slowly coming back to God. It took a while, as I just didn't know what to do with once your mind is like fried like that. So I tried everything, doctors, naturopaths, exercise, juicing, more plant-based, and whatever I could find to do. I was just like hammering all that nutrition things that I could find. And they would all be like positive and good, but I didn't realize that it wasn't going after my brain as much. I wasn't focusing on things that bring brain healing. So then Marlon, Doreen, and Cliff actually asked us to help them with a Nedley depression and anxiety recovery program in Airdrie around that time. And I thought, sure, let's help. And then during the program, the nutrition program, they talked about flax and chia and omega-3s and how it helps heal your brain. So let's just try it. And then tried it for 2 weeks. And it just went up, the brain activity and cognitive ability, and just kept. It's been fine ever since. Even though I tried all these other things, which aren't bad in them of themselves. I wasn't attacking the brain health. So God was leading on a journey, even though I had. But one thing I wanted to mention too is along the way is as I was trying to still work, kind of, God would still do things very directly to let me know that He would like literally help me. I had turned away, but He would like, no, I'm helping you right here. Make it so clear and obvious that it was Him. I was like, why are you helping me? Why would you? And then the next time, like, this doesn't make any sense. Why are you helping me? And He just kept trying to draw me back. So then at this point, we ended up, Katrina and I had worked together in the store and got to know each other over the course of 2-3 years and ended up getting married, obviously. But yeah, as we transitioned to Calgary, she was working at Chinook Winds Adventist Academy, I thought, oh, I'll just go to Calgary too. It should be easy to find work. And then as soon as I came there, the economy just like plummeted. And it was very hard to find work. And so I was like, my stepfather was always super picky with work. If he didn't like the job, no, won't do it. So it always stood out on my mind. So I said, whatever comes up, I'm just going to take it. So then the school bus driving came up. So it's like ended up driving a school bus for a year, which Katrina appreciated because then I better understood interacting with kids. And then finally the Lord opened up a job in Calgary working for the Glencoe Club and the Glencoe Golf and Country Club. And they're kind of like high, I don't know how you describe them. The membership fee is $65,000 to get in. So it's for the high and influential people of Calgary and the area. Olympic athletes train there. It's like a sport and recreation center for the wealthy. But you still have to pay for everything. Once you pay the $65,000 membership fee, you still have to pay for the food in the club, all the training, everything. Because they only want certain people there. And there's a waiting list for years. You can't get in there. And then there's different levels. You get into the first section, and then you have to wait a number of years, and then you get into the next level. It's quite the process. So it's like, why would the Lord open up the way to get into here? This is not my normal lifestyle, or like I can't. And they even provided lunches. So all your lunches, you just come to the little lunchroom for the staff. It's all free, like buffet, all the delicacies and desserts and salads. And they did have some vegan stuff, like vegetarian, but it's hard to find. But again, the Lord has, as you watch these people interacted with them, because being in the computer area in the clubs, you had access to everyone. You're always at people's desks, talking to the CEOs, senior leadership team, interacting with all of them. And you're getting to know them. And you realize, again, all of them they're searching for something. And they're not finding it, even though they have all these resources at their fingertips. Power, Freemasonry was a big thing there too. A lot of high up leaders that are working there. But yeah, God had many answers to prayer. Because even during the lunches, they would notice that I'd be eating differently. It's like, why don't you just eat the food that we provide? Like it's, and then you'd explain, and yeah, it's kind of weird, but okay. But I'd never eat the desserts. I always like find the salads or the vegetarian type. To the point where I actually even started bringing my own food. And they're like, oh, okay, now this is really, why don't you just eat what we're providing? But over the course of 5 years, the Lord helped build a rapport and respect to these people. And even Brad, who I've been mentioning in Praise and Prayer Time, Brad Sloiter, he was the HR manager that has pancreatic cancer. He was one of the people that I met there too. And so I've been able to share a lot with him about God and healing and trying to direct him to the mighty healer. But yeah, a lot of things, like say if you're working in whatever position, it's easy to take the credit for ourselves. And so a lot of the time, God would just try to impress me. The whole club is down, like the main accounting server's down. There's people at the golf course that need to check in at 8 a.m. You got a call from managers like 7:30, like everything is down. It's like, what do? You don't know what's causing it. It could be anything. So then first thing, God just put in my mind, just pray and ask me for wisdom. And so I asked him for help. And I was thinking about it a little bit, and we had just installed Cisco AMP for endpoints. It's an enterprise antivirus software. But one of the settings that we had just enabled is if there's any sort of malicious activity, it will immediately block the computer or the server from the network. It's completely unusable until you go in and resolve the problem. And that's what happened on the accounting server. It had picked up a false positive, and it wasn't actually malicious, but it just shut everything down. But we only had half an hour to solve the problem. Otherwise, we'd be getting a lot of phone calls. So then, when it was resolved, like about 7:58, that was the day that the SLT team met. So they met, talked about it, and they said, "Oh, thank you, you did an amazing job." Everything was like, well, I prayed about it, and God gave the answer on how to fix it. So multiple times trying to, and they're just like, don't really respond. It's like, yeah, that's nice, but respectful though. I would say they were always very respectful. They weren't antagonistic or mean in any way, but just people always searching for something that different, like sharing with my IT manager, different books, DVDs. I still am in contact with him. He's retired now, but still have good conversations, and he still is maybe not open to following the Lord, but I keep praying for him, and hopefully one day he'll be in the kingdom as well. All right, it's almost done. You guys are probably getting bored, but so then after the Glencoe, or just near the end, COVID hit. And they're like, no, something's weird with what's going on. We're just not comfortable with how things are going down. My team manager talked to me, trying to feel me out for what I'd be willing to do and not do. Not saying it directly, but I knew he was saying. And then the opportunity came up to come to Cherryville. And we were staying just outside Calgary at the time. And Sean Cliff actually had asked me to come help him for a couple weeks. And then the person's property we were staying on, he really advised me. He's like, no, don't go. You need to stay in your house. You need to take care of what you need to do. I was like, no, I gave my word I need to go. So we went and came, and then as the story as I best know it, you'll have to clarify a little bit, but from what I know is we walked in, Cindy saw us as we came in the door, and she's like, I bet these people are looking to move here. I should talk to them. Yeah. And then we never ended up talking that Sabbath. You guys had to go, and yep. Derek and yeah. So then I talked to Derek as well during the week, or that Sunday or Monday. And then from what I remember, he ended up announcing it the next Sabbath that we were looking for a place to stay. And we thought, yeah, it's getting pretty close to winter. Joshua was just about to be born. He was like a month away. And you had called us again, and we said, no, it's too close. And then you're like, no, you have to pray about it. So we prayed about it, and as we were praying, Psalms 37 came to mind. And we're like, I don't remember what Psalms 37 says. So we'll go read the whole thing, and the gist of it was, I will lead you along the path that's, just trust me. You don't have to worry. So like, okay, but there's a lot of logistics that have to happen. You can't just move a house from one province to the other in a short time before a baby is coming. So I thought, well, let's pray, and we made phone calls for 3 days straight. And after the 3 days, everything was ready to go. We just had to say yes. So what happens if we say no? Maybe we shouldn't find out. So then, we ended up coming, and I guess, some know that we live in a smaller house, which has been a blessing. Ooh. Sometimes that's a bad thing with scroll. So yeah, I only had 3 days. So I got the rental truck, pulled it across the mountains, and I had 3 days to kind of winterize the house at the Vlad's property. And then I had to head back to Airdrie before Joshua came. He was a week away. So I'm like driving, I don't know, it was like all night that Wednesday into Thursday to get back to Calgary so that I could return the truck before 8 or 9 a.m., whatever it was. Otherwise, get charged another day. And so then came back, and then a week went by, we were staying at the Cliffs, and then Joshua was born. It's like he seemed to have been waiting for me to get back. So he popped out, and then we stayed there at the Cliffs for about 3 weeks, and then made the journey all the way here in a couple cars with all the remaining stuff. And yeah, it's definitely been a blessing to be here. It's an amazing church family, and they're all very kind and generous to us, and we just look forward to see what the Lord has planned next. But then I didn't want to just leave it there, or maybe I should. Are you sure? People aren't getting sleepy. I kind of have a mellow tone voice, so or monotone, is that's the word. Huh? They're done. Yeah. Well, I'll share just a little bit at the end, even though I was going to share more, but as thinking back to the very first verse is Colossians 1:27, is Christ in you, the hope of glory. So like everything that I've shared, it would not have been possible unless the Lord would have directed it at every step. That adversary was definitely out to take me out at every step. He does not want us to know the Lord. He does not want us to stay in contact with the Lord, in connection with the Lord. And if we turn away, even though I highly regret that decision, and there was actually a verse by Dwight Nelson, a saying in one of Dwight Nelson's sermons that always stuck with me during the healing process. He's kept repeating it over and over in the sermon, is, I choose to put my trust in you. I think it was from Psalms. And so every time something happens that you don't know what to do, that he keeps popping that into my head. I know I choose to put my trust in you, even though I don't know what's going to happen. So where are we now? And who are we needing to keep our eyes on as we are just on the borders of the heavenly Canaan? And in thinking about that, I was like, where in the Bible do you think of when I mention the word Laodicea? Yeah, Revelation. That's usually the first thing that comes to mind. But, but something that came up recently, I'm sure a lot of you have probably seen it, I never saw it until like 2 months ago, is in Colossians. And this is what it says. Colossians 2, 1-3. For I want you to know what a great conflict I have for you and those in Laodicea, and for as many as have not seen my face in the flesh, and that their hearts may be encouraged, being knit together in love, and attaining to all riches of the full assurance of understanding, to the knowledge of the mystery of God, both of the Father and of Christ, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. And also Colossians 4:16. Now when this epistle is read among you, the epistle to the Colossians, see that it is also read in the church of Laodiceans, and that you likewise read this epistle from Laodicea. So then I was like, oh, wait a second. So the Colossians is actually a message for Laodicea. At least that's the way I'd seen it, but so then I'm like, okay, well, I need to understand Colossians then. So I'm like reading it over and over and over. What is it? What is the message to to Laodicea that's also to the Colossians? And then again, I come across that verse, Christ in you, the hope of glory. And the book of Colossians actually divides neatly in half, with the first portion being like doctrinal, chapters 1 and 2, and the second practical, which is chapters 3 and 4. And Paul's purpose is to show that Christ is preeminent, which means the first and foremost in everything, and that the Christian's life should reflect that priority. Because believers are rooted in him, alive in him, hidden in him, and complete in him, it is utterly inconsistent for them to live life without him. Clothed in his love, with his peace ruling in their hearts, they are equipped to make Christ first in every area of life. And then you see Christ in Colossians. It's all over the place. He's the head of all principalities and powers, the Lord of creation, the author of reconciliation. He is the basis for the believer's hope, the source of the believer's power for a new life, the believer's redeemer and reconciler, the embodiment of full deity, the creator and sustainer of all things, the head of the church, the resurrected God-man, and the all-sufficient Savior. So you're finding all this in Colossians. So it's like the message to Laodicea is Christ in you, the hope of glory. He's the only thing that we need to keep our eyes on, because will we be able to take care of ourselves with what's coming? It's easy to think that, though. That's the way I was. Like, we have the internet. We can answer all our questions. We can talk to AI. We can we can get all our houses and everything set up, all self-sustaining, self-sufficient, self-watering. Everything is perfect. We're ready to go. The end is coming. We're good to go. But then the more I was reading Colossians over and over and over, it's like, well, are we putting our trust in ourselves? Or are we putting trust in Jesus? As we're just on the borders of the heavenly Canaan, what did the Israelites do just as they were on the borders of the earthly Canaan? How did Satan attack them? I was even thinking, fear is a big one. And then subtleties, like when the Moabites came and invited them to their homes and fed them and had nice music, and then they ended up under the sheets, and there's all sorts of things going on, very subtle. And so if that was happening on the borders of the earthly Canaan, and there's obviously a lot more you go into, but is Satan going to try to use all the different subtleties to distract us, to lead us away from God? All right, almost done. Yeah, Colossians is perhaps the most Christ-centered book of the Bible. In it, Paul stresses the preeminence of the person of Christ, the completeness of salvation he provides in order to combat a growing heresy that is threatening the church in Colossus. This heresy seeks to devalue Christ by elevating speculation, ritualism, mysticism, and asceticism, which is a lifestyle characterized by abstinence from sensual pleasures, often for the purpose of pursuing spiritual goals. But Christ, the Lord of creation and head of the body, is completely sufficient for every spiritual and practical need of the believer. The last half of the epistle explores the application of these principles to daily life, because doctrinal truth, chapters 1 and 2, and must bear fruit in practical conduct in chapters 3 and 4. So the two major topics are supremacy of Christ in chapters 1 and 2, and submission to Christ in chapters 3 and 4. And we'll skip some of this. This was the main quote that I was finding when it comes to Christ in you, the hope of glory. The souls that have borne the likeness of Satan have become transformed into the image of God. This change in itself is the miracle of miracles, a change wrought by the Word. It is one of the deepest mysteries of the Word. We cannot understand it, and we can only believe it. As declared by the Scriptures, it is Christ in you, the hope of glory. So it's literally a miracle, I would say, that we are all here. None of us should be here. None of us always should be able to absorb in the world or dead or following pursuits that we shouldn't be pursuing, women or food or cars or houses or whatever it may be. The devil doesn't really care. So it is truly a miracle of miracles that we are all here and that Christ is in us, the hope of glory. But I'll leave it there for now.